Some cases do not arrive looking dangerous. They come wrapped in ordinary municipal paperwork, looking like minor administrative errors. But if you look closely at the fine print, you find a shocking human cost hiding underneath. The morning 86-year-old Margaret Chen walked into the courtroom. The room was already filled with a heavy, tense silence. Margaret sat at the defense table with one hand gripping a white cane, the other resting on her daughter's arm. The unmistakable posture of an elderly woman caught in a terrifying bureaucratic machine. Beside her sat her daughter, Linda Chen, carrying the deep, visible exhaustion of a family fighting to protect their vulnerable mother from financial ruin. Across the aisle sat the young city prosecutor, David Hastings, his arms crossed, wearing an expression of pure, dismissive indifference. To him, this wasn't a living person. It was just another collection file on a grocery list. The case on the docket? A parking violation debt that had quietly escalated into a multi-year financial disaster of late penalties, compounding fees, and an outstanding warrant for her arrest. But as the judge leaned forward and reviewed the file, she immediately spotted an absurdity so profound it made her blood run cold. The city prosecutor was demanding $14,200 in unpaid citations accumulated over 3 straight years. The problem: the defendant standing before the bench was blind, completely blind. In over 4 decades on the bench, she had dealt with every trick in the book, but what this prosecutor was about to defend would push her patience to its absolute limit. Over the next 15 minutes, a stack of automated parking tickets would unravel into a massive exposure of bureaucratic incompetence, proving exactly what happens when authority completely detaches itself from common sense. The judge wasted zero time, her eyes locking onto the prosecution podium like a laser. "Mr. Hastings, before we proceed, I need you to tell me something," she said, her voice cutting through the room. "Did you actually review this case before walking into my courtroom?" "Yes, Your Honor," Hastings responded, completely unbothered. The defendant has consistently ignored citations and failed to appear for previous hearings. The judge let those words hang heavily in the air. "Mrs. Chen, how old are you?" 86, Your Honor." Her voice was soft but steady. "And how long have you been blind?" 12 years, Your Honor. Macular degeneration." The judge slammed the file down and turned back to Hastings. "She's been blind for 12 years. The ticket started 3 years ago. Does that timeline interest you at all, counselor?" Before the prosecutor could hide behind standard bureaucracy, Linda Chen stepped up to the podium, her hands shaking slightly as she pulled out the physical tickets. She testified that her elderly mother hadn't driven a car or held a license in over a decade. 8 years ago, Margaret had moved in with her daughter, and 6 months later, they sold her old vehicle. They believed everything was legally handled, but the new owner never properly registered the vehicle in their name. They simply kept the old plates, driving around Los Angeles for 3 straight years, parking illegally and leaving a trail of violations. To the automated municipal system, it was a closed case. License plate present, citations unpaid, penalties escalated. But to this household, a complete stranger's illegal parking was about to trigger an inescapable financial avalanche. The municipal machine functioned exactly as it was programmed to do, relentlessly and without human thought. Because the system kept sending automated escalation notices to Margaret's old, vacant address, the family had absolutely no idea the debt even existed. By the time the city tracked them down, a double-digit oversight had ballooned into a terrifying $14,000 nightmare, complete with an active warrant for an 86-year-old blind woman's arrest. Hastings frantically shuffled his papers, suddenly realizing he had walked into a complete disaster. "Your Honor, if I could request a continuance to investigate further." "Denied," the judge barked. "We're investigating right now." She pulled up the individual violation logs on her monitor. inspecting the raw data. The first ticket had been issued 7 months after Margaret's ophthalmologist certified her as legally blind. It was written on Melrose Avenue at 2 o'clock in the morning. Mrs. Chen, were you frequenting Melrose Avenue nightclubs at 85 years old? The judge asked. A small smile crossed Margaret's face despite the immense stress. No, Your Honor, I was in bed by 9. The tickets continued down a frantic pattern. Venice Beach, Hollywood, Koreatown at midnight. Linda presented meticulous care logs, medical timestamps, and family photos proving her mother was miles away from every single location. Yet, Hastings tried to dug his heels into a cold, technical line of defense. Your Honor, even if Mrs. Chen wasn't the driver, the vehicle was registered in her name, the prosecutor interjected, trying to salvage his case. The law requires her to be legally responsible. If someone steals your identity and racks up credit card debts, should you be forced to pay it? The judge countered, her voice rising in anger. Someone was fraudulently using her registration. You want to financially destroy an elderly woman for an administrative oversight because your office was too lazy to look at basic facts? That is your fault, not hers. The judge leaned over her desk, her expression shifting into a look of absolute dominance. The arrogance the prosecution had walked into the room with was entirely gone. Here's what's going to happen, the judge declared, her voice carrying absolute authority. Mr. Hastings, you're going to go back to the city attorney's office and you're going to recommend that every single ticket issued after Mrs. Chen's sale date be dismissed entirely. Not reduced. Dismissed. Your Honor, I don't have the authority to. Then find someone who does. The judge cut him off sharply. Because if you force me to make this ruling from the bench, I am going to do it in a way that generates massive publicity. I will make this a national story about how Los Angeles pursued a blind 86-year-old woman for $14,000 in tickets she physically could not have incurred. Is that the story the city wants told? Hastings' face went completely pale. Bad publicity was the one thing city attorneys feared more than losing a case. The judge ordered a 30-day continuance, giving the city until 5 o'clock that evening to accept her resolution or face a formal complaint for prosecutorial overreach. Recognizing the absolute catastrophe, Hastings backed down. Within 3 hours, the city attorney himself called the chambers to completely capitulate, agreeing to dismiss all $14,000 of the fraudulent debt. Margaret stood slowly, her daughter supporting her arm. Before leaving, she turned to the gallery, looked toward the scattered spectators with her clouded eyes, and softly said, "Thank you for being witnesses to what justice looks like." Then she bowed in deep gratitude, a moment of pure, heartbreaking grace that left the entire courtroom stunned. But the true climax of Margaret Chen's case didn't end with a dismissed file. 2 weeks later, a handwritten letter on flowered stationery arrived at the judge's chambers. The DMV had launched a formal fraud investigation, and they had just caught the driver. But what the investigation uncovered completely shattered the assumption that this was a simple case of a lazy car buyer. A phone call from the fraud division brought Detective Sarah Morrison to the judge's chambers with a massive, thick file. The driver wasn't a random stranger. His name was David Torres, and he was the leader of a highly sophisticated identity theft ring targeting elderly Asian immigrants. Even more sickening, Torres lived just 2 floors above Margaret in her own apartment building. He had stood beside her in the elevator, looked her in the eye, and intentionally targeted her because he knew she was blind, isolated, and unlikely to fight back. Using a corrupt employee inside the DMV, Torres had accessed records of seniors over 75, creating fake vehicle registrations under their names. He had duplicated this malicious scheme across 237 innocent victims. The scale of the exploitation was massive. Torres had pocketed over $40,000 selling the fake registrations. while the city automated systems had quietly collected nearly $250,000 in fraudulent fines from terrified elderly citizens who simply paid the tickets out of pure fear. The city attorney's office immediately tried to hide behind another corporate technicality, arguing that because the vehicles were technically registered under those names at the time, the city should legally keep the $250,000 in fines, but they underestimated the fury of a bench dedicated to true justice. The judge didn't hesitate. She stepped down from her high bench, walked into a different courtroom, and took the witness stand herself to testify against the city's predatory collection practices. The system was designed to process people, not protect them, she testified passionately. And if Mrs. Chen hadn't been persistent, she would have been financially ruined because the city refused to investigate obvious red flags. Faced with the judge's devastating testimony, the city broke. They agreed to a historic settlement, issuing full restitution checks, plus interest to all 237 elderly victims, totaling $283,000. Even greater, Margaret's fight triggered a sweeping statewide investigation into the traffic court system. A brand new protocol was legally implemented, the Chen review process, those mandating automatic fraud checks for any defendant over 75, ensuring that no vulnerable senior could ever be quietly crushed by automated collection machinery again. Justice, in its plain clothes, is rarely about the closing of a file. It is about what happens to the people after they walk through those heavy double doors and return to real life. Margaret Chen passed away peacefully 2 years later from natural causes, living out her final days in the very home she had fought so hard to protect. She left this world knowing that because she refused to be quietly processed by a broken machine, she had protected hundreds of other families from the same terrifying fate, but her presence never truly left the courthouse. In her final follow-up appearance, Margaret had presented the judge with a small package wrapped in tissue paper. Inside was a delicate, cream-colored bookmark with blue flowers, hand-knitted by Margaret herself over 3 weeks because her hands shook. To this day, that bookmark sits inside the judge's desk drawer. Every single morning before she takes the bench to face a new stack of municipal files, she opens that drawer and looks at the delicate threads. It serves as an unyielding reminder that the system isn't broken by accident. It is broken by design to value efficiency over humanity. True accountability isn't about ensuring that every line of a rule book is blindly executed until there is nothing left of a community. It is about having the courage to look past the ink on the paper, ask if the situation makes sense, and protect the real human beings hiding underneath.